morning, everyone. I have a brief statement to make. We finally have the documents. This is the start of this matter, not the end. We are going to continue the work that we were doing 3 years ago when the Canada-China Committee asked for the Winnipeg lab documents. We have to conduct this work because the government isn't going to. The government has said, and Minister Holland more specifically, that no one within the Public Health Agency of Canada is going to be held accountable and terminated for these lapses at the Winnipeg lab. So Parliament has to hold the government accountable and do its job. This is a grave and serious matter that requires a parliamentary committee to examine. Dr. Chu clandestinely collaborated with the government and the military of the PRC and was paid by that government and military of the PRC without the Government of Canada knowing. The Winnipeg lab is part of a broader pattern of neglect of national security by this government. We have these Winnipeg lab breaches. We have the neglect of sensitive areas of research at Canadian universities that has gone on for years. Sensitive areas of research in areas like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, and so many other areas. We have the neglect to protect our democratic institutions in our elections, which is why the government was forced to call a public inquiry, which is ongoing. And in all of this, the Prime Minister has been absent. In open and accountable government, which is one of the government's founding cabinet documents, the Prime Minister is uniquely accountable for national security. That document also says that the Prime Minister alone is responsible for the machinery of government. In other words, the Prime Minister alone is responsible for the flow of intelligence and information between the different agencies and departments of the Government of Canada. The motion which I plan on moving in front of committee today is to examine the flow of information and intelligence within the Government of Canada. It's to examine why this matter wasn't caught earlier than September 2018. As you'll recall, it was in September 2018 that the first red flag went up, but the registration of a patent in the People's Republic of China by Dr. Chu, which is against government policy and Canadian law. The motion is also to examine why it took 10 months for the government to secure the lab after September 2018. All the while, computers were being seized, trips were being denied for approval that have been applied to by Dr. Chu to the PRC. It's also to examine why government systems didn't flag the 5 trips that Dr. Chu had taken to the PRC in a 2-year period in 2017 and 2018. The motion will also examine why the documents ordered by the Canada-China Committee 3 years ago were not given to Parliament. Minister Holland has said that it's the fault of the Public Health Agency of Canada, that it was a decision of bureaucrats not to release these documents 3 years ago to the Public Health Agency of Canada. And that's why the motion includes the committee calling witnesses from the Public Health Agency of Canada to explain why these documents were overclassified and why it took 3 years for these documents to be produced. Finally, we have to hold the government accountable. The government defied 4 orders of the House of Commons and its committee in 2021. It then took the unprecedented step of taking the Speaker of the House of Commons to court and then called an early election. And so Parliament has its work cut out for it. It has a job to do to examine this matter and to hold the government accountable. Thank you.
Mr. Chong, are you satisfied with how long the RCMP investigation has taken into this? Should it be going faster?
Well, that's a matter that we'll be peripherally touching on by looking at why it took so long for this matter to be uncovered in September 2018, and why it took so long for the lab to be secured, and why it took 3 years for Parliament to get this information. In all of this, things are taking far too long. And so in discovering that, it is our hope that the committee can produce a report with recommendations that will shorten the timeframes for the flow of intelligence and information to ensure that breaches like this are dealt with in a much more timely manner.
And what about the security of the lab now? Are you satisfied that the lab is adequately secure?
No, I'm not. And the reason, and that's another reason for this examination by Parliament. Minister Holland has contradicted some of the information contained in the documents that were released last week. He has said that there were no actual breaches at the lab. He's also indicated that no information left the country. That's contradicted many times in the documents that we received last week. And that's why we think Parliament has a job to do here in order to dig into this matter further, to understand what has gone wrong, and to issue a report with recommendations.
Avez-vous l'impression que ça pourrait donc se reproduire s'il n'y a pas eu d'amélioration d'apportée ou si le laboratoire n'a pas été sécurisé ou si on n'a pas revu les façons de faire?
Oui, on doit examiner cet enjeu. Je pense que les documents, c'est un commencement de notre étude devant le comité. Je pense qu'on a besoin d'examiner l'autre chose qui concerne cet enjeu. On a besoin d'avoir des témoins devant notre comité, des témoins de l'Agence de la santé publique du Canada, témoins de les ministres qui a dit qu'il n'y a pas de problème ici. Et qu'ils ont dit que le problème a été déjà réglé. On n'a pas cette confiance que le gouvernement a maintenant, donc c'est la raison pour laquelle on présente cette motion aujourd'hui.
Et qui a caché, selon vous, les fonctionnaires ou est-ce que les ministres étaient
J'ai aucune idée, c'est la raison pour notre étude. Le ministre a blâmé les fonctionnaires. On a un peu de scepticisme parce que c'était le gouvernement qui a... C'est le cabinet dans la Chambre des communes qui a dit non à un comité du Parlement il y a 3 ans pour présenter ces documents. Donc, je pense que les ministres et les premiers ministres ont une responsabilité dans cet enjeu maintenant. Et c'est pas, à mon avis, c'est pas correct pour le Premier ministre et les ministres a dit que c'est totalement la responsabilité des fonctionnaires. C'est pas mon point de vue.
Just to clarify, what are the specific questions you think that this committee needs to answer that wasn't already outlined in hundreds of pages of these documents?
Well, first off, why did it take so long for these breaches to be discovered at the Winnipeg lab? The first red flag goes up in September 2018, despite the fact that for several years beforehand, for a couple of years beforehand, these breaches had been taking place. At least five trips that we know of to the People's Republic of China, which involved unauthorized visits to PRC entities and unauthorized transmission of information and materials. Unauthorized payments by the PRC and by the PLA of travel within the PRC. We need to examine why, when the first red flag went up, according to these documents, in 2018, it took 10 months to secure the lab. We need to understand when the Prime Minister first became aware of these national security breaches. And finally, we need to understand why we didn't get these documents 3 years ago. We've lost 3 years in examining this matter because there was an overclassification of these documents and Parliament didn't get the information it should have gotten. The process that we had proposed for the Canada-China Committee to get these documents was very similar to the process that the ad hoc committee of 4 MPs and 3 judges went through. In lieu of the 3 judges, we had the law clerk and parliamentary counsel who was going to work closely with government officials to redact the documents. They were going to be delivered to Parliament under lock and key, and no information injurious to national security was going to be released. That's essentially the same process that was outlined, that was conducted by the ad hoc committee. Yet it took us 3 years to get these documents. So we need to understand what breakdown in information systems took place that caused this debacle, that caused this delay of 3 years in getting this information.
Do you think you have wide support with the other members of the committee for this motion?
Well, I hope so. As I said, this is a grave and serious matter. CSIS assessed that this was a serious danger, a serious threat to the security of Canada. The fact that it's taken us 3 years to get to this point should concern all parliamentarians, and I'm hopeful that at today's meeting the motion will be adopted that will allow this committee, which is responsible for access to information, to get to the bottom of this matter, to issue a report with recommendations so we can strengthen this country's national security and hold the government accountable.
If it doesn't, what does that say to you?
Well, it says that that the Liberal government, in support with the NDP, is covering things up and is not looking to Canada's interests in protecting our national security. This is part of a broader pattern. I mentioned the interference in our federal elections and in our democratic institutions. I mentioned the ongoing serious national security threats and theft of intellectual property, which is taking place in sensitive areas of research across the country that CSIS for almost a decade now has been drawing attention to. And so I think we have a responsibility of parliamentarians to set aside partisanship when it comes to these kinds of matters and hold the government accountable so that we can ensure that our national security is strengthened. Thank you very much.
Thank you.